Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Gadalizzi, the Executive Vice President of the American Supply Association. You are signed up for the ASA CEO webinar entitled The Value of Utilizing a Board of Directors to Advance Your Distributor Business. I'd like to call attention to ASA's supplier partners. We're very thankful for those folks that have helped us in 2016. Their support of ASA enables us to do things well beyond what our membership dues can provide. So we thank them for their support for ASA and for our members. This morning's session is being recorded and will be available for viewing within the next few days on the ASA website in the My ASA page section. You will need your member login number to gain access for the replay. Your microphones are muted, but you will be able to ask questions if you have not already done so in advance of this morning's session. You all should have a webinar dashboard on your screen, and will notice on the right-hand side is a box to type in your questions. Feel free to send us your questions as you think of them, and don't wait for the formal Q&A session of the webinar. Okay, let's get started. This morning's session is the value of utilizing a board of directors to advance your distributor business. As a distributor, you build a team of professionals to meet the daily challenges of running your wholesale distributorship, from sales and purchasing to order fulfillment and warehouse operations. But what system have you implemented to support your vision of how you want your business to grow and how to deal effectively with outside forces? More distributors are looking at the value of establishing a board of directors to gain perspective and fresh ideas from outside the company. Whether it's a formal board or one that is more advisory in nature, a board can assist your team in stepping back and focus on higher level goals and vision. Victor Aspengren, Director of Prairie Capital Advisors, is joining us today to facilitate a panel discussion of the value of implementing board of directors with industry distributors who are already utilizing boards in their operation. As part of the Prairie Capital Advisors team, Victor provides the expertise of business leaders on topics such as ownership and leadership transition, strategy governance, and organizational development. He is past chairman of the National Center for Employee Ownership and has served on the board of the National ESOP Association. Victor is joined today by ASA past president Joe Paling, chairman of First Supply in Madison, Wisconsin, and Dr. Don McNeely, president and CEO of Chicago Tube and Iron in Romeoville, Illinois. And today both of them are Cubs fans. I just had to get that in. Both Joe and Don have firsthand experience on the value of utilizing boards in their operations. Some topics covered in this morning's session: the value of implementing a board of directors. Should your board be a formal fiduciary board or an advisory non-formal board? What should your board makeup include? How to get started and how to select an effective board. In addition, we did have a few of you submit topics that you wanted covered that I know the panelists will cover during this 1 hour session. So gentlemen, let's get started.
Great, thank you, Mike. Well, welcome everyone to this webinar. And we'll get right into this by doing some quick company overview. So with that, Don, would you like to just give a quick overview of your company and your board structure?
Sure. Our company is started out in Chicago South Side, back of the Yards neighborhood. You might recall the book The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. He identified and depicted the South Side of Chicago back in those early days, and that is the genesis of our company, 1914. So we've been around for now our 103rd year. We're founded on devout capitalistic principles. We get up each and every day to earn a profit, and we're not embarrassed to espouse our capitalistic principles. With that money, in turn, we buy equipment, we build plants, we create employment, we pay taxes, and that's the beauty of the foundation of capitalism. So we are tubing and pipe, valve, and fittings, and because of those capitalistic principles, we've posted 103 years of consecutive profitability. One of the founders, fourth generation, was looking to exit 4 years ago. So we found a wonderful strategic partner in Olympic Steel. They went public in 1994 out of Cleveland, Ohio. So the Chicago Tube and Iron subsidiary is $250 million, 425 employees throughout 10 locations. And combined with Olympic, 34 locations throughout the United States and Mexico, with about $1.5 billion in revenue, 2,000 jobs, and 5,000 dependents. So we're pretty proud of what we're doing out there. Quickly, our board structure is we, of course, have a public company board for Olympic, and then as a wholly owned subsidiary, Chicago Tribune has a board as well. So that's a quick overview from 50,000 feet of our enterprise.
Great. Thanks, Don. Joe?
First Supply is a fifth-generation family-owned business. We're a little bit more focused than the industrial, which we do have an industrial division, but we do work a little heavier in the plumbing and heating, waterworks, and fluid handling business. We do have a full fiduciary board with operating committee structure, and we'll talk a little bit about the operating committees because I think those are important. But we have 3 outside board members and 2 family directors. So we are tilted towards the outside independent director from the inside management side of the business. We have about $280 million in total revenues with about 650 employees. But the important part there is we began our board about 25 years ago when we were closer to about $40 million of business. And it has really helped us grow over that time of year from back then to where we are today.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And just a little history, I say I'm a recovering CEO. Back in the late 90s, we had an employee-owned company where one of the requirements is to have a board of directors, and I was, you could say, fortunate and or unfortunate that we had a completely outside board of directors, which is still kind of unheard of in the private area. But so I learned a lot of lessons about boards and how they work. And Prairie Capital, we work with over 260 companies across the country working on value and corporate finance, but then we also have these discussions of should we have a board, how does the board work, where do we find board members, all the things that Mike alluded to in the introduction. So it's a very dynamic topic, and if we go to just kind of the broad scope of boards, because I'm sure there are many of you that are on this webinar right now that you may not have a board, or you might have a board that's like, it's okay, want to ramp it up. But from a broad scope, one of the first things is when people think about a board is, well, what's my cost benefit? Because obviously there is some cost, and we'll get to that a little later, but there's a cost to have a board. And then you say, well, what's going to be the return back into the organization if I create this board of directors? And you really have to think about that and say, well, what are you looking for to get out of this board of directors that's going to help the organization and specifically help that CEO have ideas, be the sounding board for that CEO, and help provide that really strategic. And boards can be somewhat operational, and there's stages of life that boards go through, but ultimately the board should be a strategic thinking partner for the organization and for the CEO. And then you think about just all the public attention to all the different things, the product liability, the Samsung 7 crisis that you get on the planes today and everybody's freaking out. Well, I guarantee you that board of directors having some pretty dynamic conversations right now. How are they going to cope with this? What are they going to do? The stock value, obviously, that's what board's there to help. What's that ROI? What is the value of the company? How are you driving value in the company, whether you're publicly traded or whether you're private like Joe? It doesn't really make a difference. You're looking to grow value over time, and that's part of the duty of a board is to help make that happen. And then the social responsibility, whether it's environmental, whether it's creating jobs, as Don said, making money and spreading that out to other people and paying the taxes. How the board can help guide and make sure that companies are doing the right things, and that there's that balance of governance, which kind of rolls into one of the very, very key things of a board is it's really that CEO oversight as well as the succession plan for that CEO. Because like it or not, the CEO in that leadership position sets a very strong tone for companies where they're at today and where they're going to be in the future. And sometimes those can get aligned, and that's where a board of directors can come in and say, hey, CEO, we need to have a chat. Maybe some behavior needs to change, or there's some other issues. Or in a worst case scenario, that's one of the high duties of a board of directors, is that you have to dismiss an executive director. And I go back to my first experience on a board was I was in my early 20s on the board of a nonprofit cancer group called the Heart Connection. And the executive director got in conflict with the hospitals that provided the care to send these kids to camp. So I think I was 26 years old. I was the co-chair. The chair was the mother of one of the children that had passed away. The executive director was doing some really crazy things that the hospital said either the director goes or we're pulling all support from the program to the thing. So as a co-chair, I inherited the great, wonderful experience of having to dismiss a CEO. And that was my first experience back in my 20s. And heaven forbid you have to go that. But I think the experiences, some of the things you'll hear from Joe and Don today, are here are some really key structural things that can help you, that you never have to get to that. But that is one of the ultimate points of a board of directors, is you have to be responsible to that CEO. The CEO has to answer to that board of directors. And then obviously we're all aware of the global economy and market changes, and how do you keep pace with that? And I think finding and recruiting those kinds of board members that can help bring that experience, if you don't have it, to keep up with the fast-paced changes that are happening in all the different markets and the economies. In today's world, even 15 years ago, we did not have the rapid change that we're having today as far as the economy and how it moves forward. So with that, let's go into this, and let's get to some of the meaty stuff. I know we have some questions here, but I think one of the big questions that people have, and I think Joe and Don, we've already had a little pre-discussion, is where do I find these board members if I'm going to create a board member? Because finding that right board member is really critical. So Don, do you have some comments on that?
So I think when you're looking for directors, there's really two avenues. So just metaphorically, picture yourself at a fork in the road. One is through your personal network, and the other is by engaging a third party, just as you would engage somebody on a routine search for a position you have open. There are people that specialize in routine searches for directors. If you look at a personal network, you're going to look at people you know in the industry, people you know in your community. You're going to look at probably your incumbent directors to see who they might know. And there's pros and cons to that. So let me address first going through your network. One of the pros would be it's cost effective. You're not going to pay a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 placement fee. So it's very cost effective. And second of all, if you're reaching out to your directors to find a buddy of theirs, there's going to be a comfort. Somebody's going to come in and they're going to fit comfortably, because whoever sponsored their hire is certainly going to kind of guide them along the way with that institutional knowledge, if you will. The con of going through the personal network is a risk of redundancy. We all hang around people of similar interests, similar likes, similar political persuasion. Mr. Adolessi says we're all Cubs fans today. Everybody on this broadcast, knowing I grew up by Comiskey Park, is going to beat my rear end when they see me. So he's certainly backed me into a corner. But you have that risk of redundancy if you use your network. So it's a very comfortable fit. But if you really step back, I don't know that it should be entirely comfortable. You want some challenge in there. You want some abrasiveness, if you will, productive abrasiveness. It certainly can go too far. If you go through outside recruitment, the pro is it's going to be objective. It's going to absolutely be objective, because somebody from the outside is going to challenge what is it you really need and why do you need that. Somebody incumbent that you're writing a check to is going to be somewhat reluctant to push back. So if you go to a third party, there's going to be more objectivity, and I think it's going to absolutely give you the optic of legitimacy. The optic of legitimacy. The con, though, is going to be two things, I believe. Cost. It can get significantly expensive. And number two, the ability of some directors to be able to scale up or scale down. If you bring somebody in that's with a Fortune 100, these are going to be great ideas, but they've got to be able to couple that with the affordability of that great idea. So sometimes when you go outside, they don't really understand the nature or the culture of the industry and the ability to scale. So kind of pro and con. The last thing that I'll tell you is there's another category directors fall into, either active executives or retirees. And they both bring value, but here's the subtle reality. As a CEO or a chairman of the board, you're going to love the retirees, because no matter what date you throw out there, they're available. They're very convenient directors, they're very amenable directors, and there's an efficiency to that. If you have an active CEO or active executive on your board, you're going to play the date game. Are you available? How about this date? How about that date? What about rescheduling? But typically they'll be more relevant directors, because each year I go into my retirement, perhaps I'm a little less relevant. So inside versus outside, retiree versus actively employed, that's kind of the landscape in some of the minds.
Yeah, great. Joe, you got some things to add on this?
Yeah, I 100% concur with exactly what Don said. First, I guess I want to say that I was lucky because I inherited my current board. So that was a really good thing. And so the credit for my great board really goes to them, not to me, really on it. But We are looking at expanding our board currently, so that's one of the things we're kind of going through this process right now. And our process starts with a skills assessment of what we want our board to be. That's very important. You start there. And I think we're going to talk about that in a minute, of what those skills specifically are going to be. But then what we do is, once that is defined, what my perfect candidate is, and we set those up into primary and secondary skills that we're looking for, then we go out, start searching for the people. And I'm on the board of the Private Directors Association. That as a member, you get to get resumes of people that are looking to come on boards. So that is one resource that is out there. There's a number of them. I'm not saying that's the only one out there. And as well as other paid searches firms out there. But I also wouldn't discount looking within our accounting firm, Deloitte. They have connections as well as our law firm. Michael Best happens to be ours. So those are other areas that you can talk to people about if they know of other executives. The very last place, and I would want to reemphasize what Don said here, the last place that I look for board members is friends and acquaintances of mine. That's great, but that's not going to really push me. So that's the very last place that I go.
Yeah, and I think both of those comments, when you look outside the service providers that you brought up, Joe, I think that is a great avenue. And then that kind of goes in conjunction with what Don said about the retiree or not the retiree, because he said you kind of want somebody that's live and in the action. And I do think your service provider group, whoever that is, the attorney, the accountant, your valuation company, your banker, whoever it might be, they know a lot of these executives that have great skill sets, and they know who are the ones that might have the capacity to be on a board. And they can be a great resource to find those active ones, as Don said, that can really bring relevance because they're still in the fray, they're doing the battle day in and day out, but they're going to bring that outside perspective. So Joe, your idea of going to the service providers, that's what we have found, because as a service provider for us, I've probably placed 8 or 9 people over the last couple of years just by talking to different CEOs, CFOs, and I quite frankly say, have you ever considered being on a board? I think you'd be a great board member. And then I make an introduction, and it's really up to the company to decide, because they got to vet them out. And it kind of goes to the point, Don, that you said about, you want somebody, how'd you say, somewhat abrasive or friendly abrasively or whatever it might be. But we talked a little earlier, just they need to fit your DNA. And you don't want to bring in some rogue DNA into your organization that's really going to disrupt the whole system. And Don brought that up earlier, and I think that is one that you really have to vet out. And the other thing I would say as far as just finding them is just don't forget if you have internal members, who are the right people if you have inside your organization? Who's been set up for that? Or do you have a plan that you say, here's a key person that someday I'd like to be on the board, making sure that you're thinking about some of those internal members and who are the right ones? Because sometimes it's more than the CEO and the CFO. There's somebody else in the organization that might be a really great board member, because maybe they are the slightly abrasive one that always raises the question all the time, but they may not be key, but they might be a great board member because they do that. So just let me go back just a little quick, and we'll go into criteria, but just frequency of meetings. Don and Joe, are they quarterly, monthly? What's your standard? What have you seen over the years with your experiences?
So we meet, we have a day-long meeting on a quarterly basis, and then we have committees, and everybody sits on at least 2 operating committees, and they will meet maybe twice a year, half day by telephone, not in-person meetings generally is what they'll do. But the committees are a little bit based on the need of the committee. Obviously, compensation may be a little bit different than audit, etc.
Right.
We too have the standard quarterly meetings. Now I've got my own board and I've got boards that I sit on, so they kind of run the gambit, but by and large in the middle of that bell curve, you're going to meet quarterly. There's an annual meeting, but you'll typically couple that annual meeting with the 4th quarter meeting. And then once a year we want to engage in strategy with the management team, and we will add a day and a half to one of the quarterly meetings. So you want to control your travel expenses. You want to be somewhat convenient for your directors because presumably they have a day job. And then the committee's meetings will be coupled with the board meeting, either typically before. And then the only other thing is right now the energy sector is going through tremendous turmoil. So boards in the energy sector typically have a teleconference mid-quarter. So there'll be 4 meetings a year. One is a day and a half longer due to coupling it with strategy. And then because it is very dynamic, certainly not static right now, not necessarily dynamic in a good way, there's a mid-board call, mid-quarter call. So.
And I would just add to that, the quarterly, absolutely, that's where the majority are. And to your point, Don, that mid-quarterly, or what I've seen on a lot of boards is if there is, quote, the crisis, whether it is the CEO suddenly leaves, or there's a market crisis, or there's a rules or regulation change that the government puts down that really impacts the business, going to like a monthly call. I'm currently on a healthcare board, so you can imagine what it's like in healthcare, that because of all the changes in between our face-to-face, every month we have a quick call just to keep tabs because there's so many things happening so quickly that the board wants to stay on top of it. And yes, it's a little added fee, but it's very quick. So let's go to the criteria for a good board member. Joe or Don, which one do you want to go? Because I know this is a juicy one right here. So
the interesting thing, just a lot of people don't understand the role of the board. So just to frame it for a moment, your board is elected or appointed by the ownership of the company. If that's a family, it's a family. If it's shareholders, then it's an annual meeting process. And the board operates within its scope of authority. And by the way, that scope of authority legally is going to be identified by the Constitution or the bylaws of the corporation. And typically that bylaw or that Constitution is going to address the number of directors, how they should be selected, frequency of the meetings. I mean, it's not just on a whim you pick up a phone. There is a protocol involved in this. Frankly, the board is the highest authority in an organization, the very highest. And the board appoints the CEO. The CEO is appointed by the board of directors. And then the duties of the board are to govern consistent with the policy of the bylaw, to select and approve the hire of the CEO, to terminate the CEO if such is necessary, to evaluate the CEO, and then they need to oversee the budget process and make sure that management has the financial resources. So criteria for a good board member is people that would embrace that responsibility. Like you said earlier, Victor, too many directors show up and you see them reading the board book while they're sitting in the meeting. There is really no preparation. So I think for the criteria for selecting a good board meeting is you want to bring somebody in that has a skill that you can lever for the benefit of your company. I mean, you need to be selfish. You are paying them a salary. You want a return on that salary, Victor, as you alluded to. So how can I leverage that relationship, if you will? So if you're looking at going into a new sector that you haven't sold before, say you want to reach out to automotive, or if Joe wants to go into heavier industrial, get somebody with footprints in that particular sector. If you want to move east, get somebody with footprints out in the eastern geography, because not only is that experience going to come with a lay of the land, it ought to come with a network that you can leverage from that board member. The important thing, and often overlooked in the criteria for a new board member, is make sure they're diverse from your incumbents. If you're looking at Joe and he'll fit perfectly with Mary and Sally and Eddie, that's not really the criteria. It's comfortable, but it's not necessarily productive. So one of the criteria is no matter how appealing that new director is, to make sure it's not redundant to your incumbents. And then I think just some generic things that are often overlooked. First of all, find a director that's going to inspire you. You want somebody that you're really excited to interface with, to talk to. So find somebody that inspires you. As I said earlier, find somebody that's not redundant. But find somebody you can trust. You've got to find somebody you can trust. And then once you set that board, I think you're constantly on the lookout to add to or upgrade that board. And those are some of my thoughts on the criteria, how to approach them, and maybe I can articulate them because I've seen it done wrong so many times. I've probably seen it done wrong more often than done right.
Mm-hmm. Joe?
All great points. We were talking a little bit that we're going through the skills process right now. And one of the interesting things that we're debating within our firm right now is should the skills that we're looking for be a board member skill or a consultant skill that you hire on an individual basis, that it's not a long-term need. And it's a real gray line when you start talking about should this be a consultant or a board member skill. But I really go back to some of the common basic items. You know, you have to have reputation, respect, you know, the ability to have capacity, as we've talked about. So all of that kind of sits through there. Then other skills that you know you may want to be considering is financial, legal diversification. Really agree with the concept of geography diversification if you're looking to expand geography, because one of the things that you want to do is have a board member that has some connection for your growth, if growth is a strategy for you. And having those connections out in a market is very important. But I also don't want to miss the point of age, race, and gender diversification, particularly in our industry. We do not have a lot of diversification, and every study out there shows the most profitable companies do have great diversification on their board. So I do put that out there as well. The other ones that I know we have talked about for specific skill sets is IT, HR, and logistics as well. Those are other skill sets that boards for distributors may want to consider as a primary or a secondary skill of their board members.
If you look at the typical board, if I could piggyback that comment, we kind of all smile on the diversity issue because our default is our diversity is reflective of our industry. It kind of sort of nobody wants to go first, but I certainly agree it's a worthy goal for our industry as we all are aware. But going back to what Joe had indicated, I mean, if you look at the ideal board, you want a lawyer on the board, you want somebody with strategy on the board, you want somebody with finance, you want somebody with industry experience. But this is not a time to cut costs. You know, somebody will say, hey, I found a director, he's right here in Chicago, so I have no travel expense. Well, you know what, so the other 6 guys are from Chicago as well. So once you know, a lawyer is important because if you look at the billing rates today, if you have a lawyer, that's the director you'll get the quickest and fastest payback on because you'll have access to a legal opinion. But Joe, I want to commend you because that's great insight. When you look at where we're going, you know, like Wayne Gretzky said, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck is going to be. Where is your enterprise risk? That board has to be sensitive to enterprise risk. And some of the emerging enterprise risks are, as he had indicated, information technology. Look at the breaches. Look what's going on out there. We're not immune from that. And also HR. So to look at those areas as functional areas you might want represented on the board, I think that's pretty valuable insight from Joe there.
Yeah. And the other thing I would just add to what Don, Joe, what you guys said is from my past experiences, and this isn't for every board, but in some boards I've seen this be very, very effective, is that the board members actually can become mentors to your senior leadership group. That you may have an HR person or a CFO that you find the board member that just resonates with that person, and that board member has the ability offline from the board meetings to pick up the phone and kind of be a resource for that senior management, because as an entirety the board is definitely responsible to the CEO. But then there is that next level where if the CEO is open to that kind of idea and the board's open, I've seen where that mentorship can be very powerful and help building that management team where you're bringing that expertise and they have a dialogue and it lets them have the freedom to talk to somebody else versus just the CEO all the time for some of that mentorship or guidance. And then I think, Joe, you brought it up, or maybe Don, or maybe both of you did, the whole issue of trust. And trust is something we can talk about immaculately. Right now, the election process, there is no trust all the way around, no matter who you are. Trust is an issue, and as a society, it's really, really low. And when you think about ROI in organizations, one of the #1 measurements of return on investment in an organization is the level of organizational trust. So when you think about an organization, and Don, you said it well, it starts at the board. And if you have high levels of trust at the board level, that's going to help to filter down through the whole organization because that sets the tone. So if you're looking for a way to drive ROI, and it's not easy to measure organizational trust, you can do surveys, whatever, but that factor of trust, because the example I give people in business, how many times can you violate the trust with your significant other or your kids at home? And if we took the same mentality and placed it in our business to honor trust, would it change the dynamics of our business and how we would go about it? And Don, to your point, if it's happening at the governance level, that's a very powerful thing. So thank you guys for sharing those comments. So let's get to this next question. Joe, we'll start with you. What's the biggest benefit you receive from your board as the CEO of your company? I mean, what's the thing you're like, well, this is good stuff?
Okay, first I want to go start out with that all the comments that I'm trying to make here are all based upon a board of directors' responsibilities legally, but it changes if a company goes into distress, financial distress. So I do want to make that disclaimer here.
Very
this
good
is assuming that this isn't a financially stable operating company.
And Don's nodding his head too.
Yeah. It's and if that situation develops, you do need to consult your lawyer on the responsibilities. But assuming that, one of the 5 main jobs, Don has laid out quite a few of the responsibilities of the board, is to provide continuity of organization. And such things as, succession planning, risk, strategic, governance, all of that really talks about how is a business going to continue on into the future. Not so much on what's going to happen next week, next quarter, next 6 months, but what is it going to be 3 to 5 years down the road? And so with that, the importance of keeping a longer range view on things has really helped us, making sure that we don't get caught up in the weeds, shall we say, on a regular basis. The other item that I really want to do, and it talks on the governance, on the continuity, having great governance in an organization, in a company, it really speaks volume to, one, non-participating family members, because they have that trust that you're talking about. Recruiting and retaining senior executives, if they see that there's good governance there, it does help you in that scenario. And then finally, if there ever became a family dispute, independence and best business judgment always puts the CEO in the best possible situation. So, it's really, great governance is the best thing that we got out of it, because it helps us with that continuity of the business.
Great, thanks, Joe. Don?
I think we're all in this industry because we're competitive, and by being competitive, we need to keep score. One of the hallmarks is grow, 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 and sometimes some divisions maybe downsize is the appropriate strategy. But I think in business, Victor, we get so caught up with the finance, and it is significantly important. But I think a CEO needs to manage the finance and the optics, because the optics is your brand in the market, and as you indicated earlier with Samsung, you can easily destroy that brand. So I think what the board does is constantly remind us that it's how does this play in the market? How does it play in Fort Wayne? How does it play in Peoria? How does it play in the court of public opinion? So I think, one, the board absolutely keeps you grounded in there's other responsibilities than delivering the financial numbers. The second thing is I like to go back to an old proverb, I think it's 29:18, that says, where there is no vision, the people will perish. And I think what the board does is understand that there's got to be a vision beyond the next year. When a CEO operates for 2 years in a public company, it's not 2 years, it's basically 8 quarters, because you're judged by every 90-day performance window. And so if you look at Enron, and I will name names, all of a sudden the CEO's there and he's playing chess, but the pawns and the kings and the bishops and the knights on the board aren't plastic pieces or wooden pieces, they're real lives. And you saw what happened when Enron lost its ethical platform, its moral compass. So I think a board makes sure that that ethics and moral compass is still there. So let me frame this for you for a moment. The board is important to me and to other CEOs, because if you really step back and maybe pour yourself a beer and just reflect for a moment, the CEO position is the only position in an organization without a peer. Admins can talk to other admins, salespeople can talk to other salespeople, general managers to general managers, even VPs to other VPs. But the CEO is the only position in an organization with no peer. So I think what happens with the board is the board represents a competent to speak to. So you've got somebody to bounce ideas off, and you need to establish a rapport with your board as a board and with each individual directors, and somewhere along the line, a mentor is going to emerge. So I think what they do is they bring you vision, they bring you grounding, they bring you a confidant, they bring you some mentoring, and then because this is recorded, I won't use the graphic language I want, but CEOs need somebody to call them on their crap. You know, you could get full of yourself because people inside are reluctant to challenge you. So we all need somebody to call us on our BS. And I think that's where a board comes in as well. So those are all significant benefits. Now, by the way, if you structure a board properly, it will absolutely give you an immediate return. You will find your enterprise grow both vertically and horizontally. If you structure it right, it is devastating. It is detrimental to the organization. So the old adage, even a bad board is better than no board, I don't subscribe to that. You're better off without a board if you don't structure it right. It will destroy your company.
And I would agree with that completely, Don. And this kind of goes to another thing that some people may be thinking about as you've been listening to this webinar. Obviously, you're on a public board, so the CEO is not in control. And Joe, in your board, you have a majority of outside members. So there's probably a lot of people on this webinar that are going, holy cows, you guys are talking about all this stuff. I'm the CEO or I'm the selling shareholder. I'm going to create a board and I'm going to lose control. So Joe, maybe you can speak to just when did you guys go to that, when quote, the inside control really went to the board level, where it used to be there was 3 internal board members and you only had 2 outside. Can you talk about that transition and when you decided, when did you say it's time for us to go to majority outside? Because that's it's a big step for any organization, and it's a very dynamic one that can really put a lot of stress on the organization.
So, you know, I was lucky I inherited it, remember? So
okay.
That was the situation. And so maybe it was the previous presidents and CEO that got together and said that we really need to make sure things were kept in check and that provide good governance. But ultimately, I find that that was the biggest gift that that group gave to me, was to have a really good board around me to really be able to grow the company with. So, you know, so it would have been about 20 years ago that we went to primarily an outside board member versus an inside. And it didn't become scary for me at all because
it was that way from the beginning.
It was that way from the beginning. So.
Don, you have any insights on that situation?
You want to have, I think you want to have more outside directors than inside, and as Joe was answering, it's a big leap of faith. You know, when a privately held company, and even more private than that, a family-owned company decides to make that step off that cliff to more outside than inside, that really is an optic of legitimacy because you are giving up significant power and control. Now, proper directors understand they serve at the desire of the shareholders, and therefore, if I extend that, they share at the desire of the family. But truth be told, you do need to have more external directors than internals for it to be legitimate, I believe.
To get to the legitimate, oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, one note that I do want to, we have a full charter for our governance, and the governance group is the group that actually controls the submission of names for our board of directors. And they do have a full criteria that they have put out there. And in that criteria, it does specifically say there must be more independent directors than management directors.
And one other thing, Victor, on that, you always want to have an odd number of directors. And I think the mistake some CEOs make is typically if you install a board, your CEO in more cases than not is also going to be the chairman, so you're an executive chairman, if you will. And they end up with an even number of outside directors considering themselves the tiebreaker. But you really don't want to put yourself in the position of a tiebreaker, because if you have 8 directors and the vote is 4-4, once you cast the deciding vote, you've now alienated half of your board. So I would encourage any chairman in that regard to always have an odd number of board members beyond themselves. Also, studies have shown boards are optimized with 6 or 7 members. Studies absolutely show when you go beyond 7 board members, it becomes less than optimum. In fact, it becomes somewhat progressive mitigating, if you will. So you've got to look at the numbers as well, and then the makeup of inside versus outside, and then whether you want even or odd, and whether you want that chairman included in the even and odd count. So there's a lot to it. You need to premeditate it.
Yeah. Point well taken. I would say, just from my own experience dealing with a lot of companies, Many, many boards are 5, where it's 3 internal and 2 external just to get started. And the one thing I will say, not to scare the people out there listening, is because we've got 2 boards examples here where the majority of control is outside. But for those of you that are thinking about this, I wouldn't be afraid of it, because one of the questions kind of came in that they talk about the board of advisors. And from my experience, when you just don't know, the greatest way to start this journey is to put them on as a board of advisors, because they're not a voting board member. So it's not that they can vote you out as the CEO or as whoever the position is in the company. But if they're a board of advisors, it lets you put your toe in the water to really get the experience of what do these people bring to it. And from the number of experiences where I've said, hey, put a board of advisors on, in most cases, it's like within 6 months, they're like, you know what, we just need to put them on the board because the value that they bring. So don't be scared of it. I think there's a great initial intermediary step in creating a board of advisors that can get you to 1 outside member or 2 outside members. And then practice being a good board, as you said, Don, that structure and the governance that you talked about, Joe, that you practice it. And then there's a stage in every entity. There's a stage in your company. There's a stage in board development. At some point, the time will be right when the board can go outside. And again, it's not right or wrong. As long as the company's growing and moving and doing things, as I said earlier, ethically and socially responsible, but eventually, at some point, you will get to the majority, as both of you indicated. That is best practice, so to speak.
But see, let me respond to that, because if I hear you right, there's a protocol, and we didn't necessarily follow that protocol, although it does appeal to me. So you know what is popular now, because everybody's going to look good during that interview. Some of us are experimenting with temp to hire. Let me take a look at this person as a temp for 6 months before I bring them on full time. So that's almost a dress rehearsal. When you talk about an advisory board, it's a dress rehearsal to see whether you evolve them to your board. So you go from an advisory board to a board that's dominated by insiders to eventually a legitimate board dominated by outsiders. That's your protocol you're recommending, if I hear you right?
Yeah, I think just in the evolution, because you may have been in, just like Joe, you inherited, so you haven't been through that evolution. And Don, on a public board, it's just that's the way the public boards are started. But for many, many private companies, I've just seen it. It's a big decision to even just put an outside board member on there is a big challenge. And so it's just an easier way, and I think it can expedite that process to get to ultimately what we talked about there. One of the other questions that came in, and I know you guys have opinions on this and some ideas, but it's been, do we put customers and vendors on our board? Is that a good practice, bad practice? Don, would you want to just start there, and then Joe, I know you have some thoughts on it as well.
I think Joe's probably got some more firsthand experience with this. I've got a couple of reactions. I was invited to go on the board of a customer years ago and declined just because of bandwidth, and I regretted it ever since. Because I believe as a vendor, I would love to be on my customer's board. I absolutely would be. But then it's somewhat hypocritical, because I don't know if I want a customer on my board. And I mean, if you really think of that, if you put a vendor or a customer on your board, first of all, they're going to get the peek at your financials. You know, and that's a game. You know, there's so much transparency out there today. Even though we're not in technology, our disruptor is transparency. Everybody knows everything anymore. There are no secrets. So I think there's 2 pitfalls if you put a vendor or a customer on a board. And one is they're going to get a peek at your numbers. And number 2, let me ask you, Victor, how do you ever get rid of them? Because if you ever then have them term out and do not reappoint them, come on, let's be real. You've lost a vendor, or you've lost a customer, or you've lost a friend. So I think it sounds good on the surface, but you better think it through. What's the eventual exit strategy? Now, ironically, as a vendor or customer, I'd love to be on the boards. Yes. I'd love to be. I just don't know if I want them on mine. And I'm going to acknowledge up front, that sounds a little paradoxical. It sounds a little hypocritical.
Yeah, and you know, I concur. And where I would start on something like this is really talk about the board of directors is only one board that you can have. You can also have a vendor advisory board and a customer advisory board. And we've done both in the past. On that, we've gotten a lot of value out of them. But their focus really isn't on our long-term continuity of our business. It is about what is it that we can be doing better to be a better partner with our vendors or our customers. So I wouldn't encourage it either. I don't think it's a great idea. I do happen to have a customer on my board, though, I will say that. But this particular customer is, he happens to own about 45 different companies. And this customer that he owns is only one of the 45 companies that he owns. So he's a very diverse holding individual. So
I suspect it's not your highest margin account either, is it?
It is not. It is a high volume account, but it is a low margin account. You are correct on that.
And I would agree with both of you as far as on the board. Totally agree with you with your comments. And Joe, the advisory idea I think is a great way to tap into that resource because there is value to be had from your customers and your vendors. So let's talk fees, folks, because everybody's out there. Okay, if I create this board, I don't have a board. Now I got to start paying some people. So who would like to talk about fees?
I'll start on that. So the way I look at it, it depends so much on what I ask from my board, because I can ask very little or I can ask a lot. I tend to ask quite a bit. I look at my board and expect them to spend the day preparing for the meetings, going to the meetings, and then the committees, and all of that wrapped in. So I pay them a retainer and a meeting fee. And in roughly, I kind of place that at about $250 to $350 an hour. Just what that total compensation is what they're getting paid. If you only want to meet once a year with them, obviously the fees are going to be quite a bit less. I do sit on a number of boards that pay closer to the $100 an hour range, but I'm not on that board for fees per se. It's just a little bit different program. The one other thing that I did want to touch on our board is our board can earn incentive bonuses as well based on the financial performance of the company. And they can actually earn double their fees if the performance of the company exceeds expectations as well.
Great. Don?
So I was looking for some insight from Joe and you, Victor, because when I go on a board, the thing I run to is the Audit Committee. Because if I go on audit, that means I'm not on the Comp Committee. And I run from Comp because Comp is so emotional that I really looked at this question and said, I just want to kind of sort of be all ears. But I am on, I'll talk about it from two standpoints. In a public company, there's going to be a premium because there's an exposure there. And when you go on a board, you want to look at the D&O insurance. And you want to make sure the D&O insurance covers you as a board and as an individual. So there's going to be a scrutiny. There's going to be a magnifying glass over you. You're in the papers every day. So you've got to pay a significant premium for a public company over a private just because of that exposure there. It's interesting because if I am putting a board in and pick the right team, not only does that board help me, that board member starts to network with other board members and they find value with one another, so they don't want to turn them out because all of a sudden they like that environment. That environment has brought them productive friendships. So I'm on boards anywhere from a $20 million company to a 1.5, and those fees can run from $15,000 for a small company, but you love them, or maybe they're a 118-year-old company, and you want them to be around forever, and you're part of it. So one of the boards that I am on is very modestly feed, but wonderful people. And at the end of the day, you can look in the mirror and say, I'm part of the perpetuation of a 118-year-old company. I mean, we're a company that's only 240 years of age. On the other hand, the energy company, look at what's happening with technology and the fracking and the energy sector. That's going to be written in the history books 100 years from now, and I've got a first row seat at that. So all of that is more valuable to me than comp. You never want somebody joining your board for the money. You never want it. So 100% of my speaking fees or director's fees, they all get directed to charity, and that's the majority. I'm in the majority. So most people aren't joining your board for comp. It's the third or fourth issue down the order. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's all over, but there's other things to discuss. than direct compensation. I do like Joe's idea. I've never encountered that before, where you're tying the fate of the board to the performance of the company. Now, in effect, maybe a public company is doing that with stock options,
Right.
Yeah.
but very interested in a private environment.
Yeah. So just a couple of comments to what you said there. One, as you said, Don, if you're recruiting a board member and you're out there and the first words out of their mouth is how much are you going to pay me, I'd probably run the other way, because then they're already coming in it with the wrong approach. Because Don very clearly stated that it's what are they going to learn, what can they bring, what's the camaraderie. Those are all way more valuable than the fees. That's just always been my advice. If that's the first question, be very, very cautious. And two, the hourly rate is very good. And the incentive comp, in the world that we work in with ownership transition, there's a lot of employee-owned companies out there, and this is becoming a trend as I do a lot of CEO roundtables, where in privately held companies, they're starting to tie it to some type of performance, in many cases stock appreciation rights, whatever, as you grow the value of the stock if you have a valuation done. And it is gaining a lot of traction because it's pushing for the benefit of all shareholders, and so that board responsibility, just like in a public company, goes out. So I'm seeing some traction in there. It's new, it's different, but people are really starting to gravitate towards that.
And I think a lot of the companies that look at us as directors, look at our bios and look at our track record and are very impressed. But I got to tell you, there's not a board I'm on that I don't harvest something back from my own company. You know, on the $20 million company, they're sitting there with an exposure, with an unfunded liability on a defined benefit plan in a union shop. And they speak with confidence that they're going to be able to convert it and get the union to buy in. And then we huddle up as external directors and say, no way are they going to be able to achieve that, and they do. So all of a sudden I want to know how they were able to do that. I want to extract that DNA and bring it back to my company, because I don't know that I would have been successful doing that. And here's a company a fraction of my size. On the other hand, in the energy sector, the board that I'm on, this is a company that works 7 million man-hours out in an industrial construction environment without a lost time accident. I want to find out what's going on with their safety. So I'm getting compensation beyond the dollar, and I think most directors do.
Amen. Amen to that. And then the last thing I would just say about if you're considering a board or working with a board, when you go out and look for your employees in your company, you're willing to pay to get the good people. And you can't look at the board any differently than that. If you are the people that you think are going to add value, you cannot be afraid of the fee, because it is an investment and you're looking for a return. So don't just run from it. Embrace it just like you embrace it with your employees to find the right people for the right position for those key things. So as we start to kind of wind down here, I want to get to let's not go to the lessons learned. We'll maybe say that if we have time, but let's go to the pitfalls to avoid. And I think there's probably, those are some of the greatest experiences for the audiences. What happened, where do you go, and what did we learn from it that we can share with the audience out there? Joe?
So I'll start with that one. You know, my number one pitfall to avoid is to make sure you use your board. You know, just don't let it sit there and just to monitor what's going on in the company. You are paying a good amount of money for these people to come to the meetings. And so make sure you use them, because I think that is the biggest pitfall that I can see that happens. Certainly I'll agree with what Don said earlier, that if you have a bad board, then you know you really have to go through a board evaluation process. It's one of the lessons learned that I had on here, is make sure you're doing board and CEO evaluations. So if you do have some directors who are not performing, it comes out in the board evaluation by all board members, and then it's pretty clear that if their evaluation comes in low by all the directors, that they need to be replaced. And that's the best way to keep that going.
See, I just invested a good morning, because I think that's a great idea, because in effect what you're talking about is peer review, because normally we're evaluating directors by one criteria, and that being attendance. That absolutely being attendance. So I think that's a great idea. Let me take it in a little different direction, because I certainly can't add to Joe's insight on that. So Jack Welch, you know, I remember Jack Welch coming to the business school and speaking at one time, and he said you really have 5 directors that you've got to avoid. So let's talk about pitfalls and the type of directors you want to avoid. And again, this is not my original work, but Jack Welch's. So he says, first of all, you're going to have the do-nothing director. and the director really isn't engaged whatsoever. That's the type of director that wants to know if the lunch is going to be hot or cold that day. They just are there. They're just terribly benign. The other one is he calls the white flag director, and that's the director that avoids any conflict. Avoids any conflict, always wants to make peace. Somebody in the room says black, somebody else says white, and you find him agreeing with both of them, just doesn't want to take a side. The other one is the Kabbalist who has a private agenda. There's some personal agenda, and he's going on that board to see how he or she can leverage it for themselves. So you've got to be very aware of the Kabbalist, if you will. And then I find the worst one, the meddler. You know, in my world, I think boards need to operate under the FIFO system. Faces in, fingers out. Faces in, fingers out. You don't need to get involved in the tactical decisions of running that business day to day. So you've got to watch what Welsh refers to as the meddler. And the meddler is the guy that's just going to grind the details over and over and over again. They're going to turn to page 114 and find some obscure metric to show you how smart they are or how deep they've researched it, but you've got to avoid the meddler. And the last one we all know is the pontificator that loves their own voice. They have a tendency of dominating those meetings. So, you know, be aware of those 5 people. Now, what if one of them gets in the door? What do? I heard one private company owner say, when I bring a director on, I have them all sign an undated letter of resignation. And when you find them starting to be characteristic of one of the 5 I've defined, the chairman just pulls the resignation letter out, dates it, and kisses them goodbye. Now, again, I don't know what quality of director you get, if that's a criteria for entrance, but, you know, I will close by telling you, Victor, you know, there's 3 stages in life. The first stage is you learn, the second stage is you lead, and the third stage is you need to know when it's time to leave. Typically, directors don't know when it's time to leave. They've established friendship, it's convenient, it's a cash flow. So I think I think what I would do is the pitfall I've seen is you don't have mandatory retirement. And I do think you need to have mandatory retirement, but you've got to allow the control of the chairman to waive that when, you know, leave the chairman some discretion. Leave the chairman some discretion. But you need to have some type of turnover in your board. You've got to have new blood. Otherwise, it will certainly evolve to groupthink. So for what that's worth.
No, and those are great comments, and I would concur on the evaluation of board members. I think it's one of the weakest areas that I've seen over the years I've been involved with boards, is there is not a robust valuation process, because that's how you solve the 5 traits of bad board members. Is if you have the evaluation, then you can help it. Because as when you're the CEO and you have a bad board member, they are your boss. So in a way, it's how can I get that board member off when I'm the CEO? I want them off there. And it's difficult because they are your boss. It's just be like your employee saying, I want that CEO out of there. That's a very difficult dynamic. So by having a valuation process with the peers, you can get it out. And I went through that in our first one. We had a board member. It was the same thing every board meeting. The same, here's what I learned, and we heard it 8 quarters in a row, and we didn't have an evaluation process, and it did go bad in the whole thing. And if we would have had the evaluation process, he would have been off the board sooner than what it was. So I think we're getting ready to wrap up on our time. Any last parting comments before we turn it back over to you?
Any questions we haven't hit yet? If you want to
I think we've hit the questions that came in as far as the customers on the board and just the development of board of directors and board advisors. So I think I just go there. When you put a new board member on there, and this is how long does it, I mean, do board members hit the ground running, or what's your experience? Does it take them a year? Does it take them 2 years? When do they really optimize being on your board and understanding your organization? How long does that take based on your experience?
If a new director comes in, there's a certain expectation of behavior, so they're not going to come in firing. They're going to see where the power is on the board. They're going to get a feel for it. So I think that first year is they're somewhat mitigated in their involvement. But if they haven't hit their stride by the end of the first 18 months, they will never hit it. So you're not really getting a lot of input in the first year, and I don't know that you should, but if they haven't hit their stride by 18 months, they probably never will.
Yeah, I would concur with that. That would be a really good, 1 to 2 years. You've got to give them some time to figure it out, per se. And part of it has to do with how close they are to the industry. The closer they are to the industry, then the more that they could possibly hit the ground running. But that's the one item. For my closing comment, I think this is something I'm pretty passionate about. I think it is a core thing that our industry really needs to focus on, because our industry has so much family-owned independent distributors, and when I found out how few people actually have independent fiduciary boards, I think it's a real risk factor to shut down the industry for family-owned independents in continuing on to additional generations. And so I think this is really important item for us to consider as a legacy item that our generation can really give to future generations, is a really strong board of directors for our own individual companies.
And Joe, I think that's a great closing comment, so thank you very much. Don, thank you. This is a topic we could probably spend 3 or 4 hours going about this. So with Mike, I'll turn it back over to you for closing.
Well, on behalf of ASA, I'd like to thank Prairie Capital and you, Victor, for leading this discussion, for Don and Joe, for your great insight into this topic. I think it's one that we're going to hear more of moving forward. Again, those of you listening, it will be available for replay on the ASA website, www.asa.net, in your My ASA page. Give us a couple of days to get it all up there, and watch for topics coming very soon. So thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.